My daughter came home crying after school last Thursday. Her face was red, her eyes were puffy, and her fists were clenched around the straps of her backpack. Before I could even say hello, she dropped everything at the door and ran straight to her room. I could hear her sobbing from the hallway. I followed her in, sat beside her on the edge of the bed, and gently asked what had happened. She wouldn't look at me. She just shook her head and pulled her blanket over her face. I waited in silence. Eventually, she pulled the blanket down and whispered something I will never forget. She said, "You're a nobody." At first, I didn't understand. "Who said that?" I asked. "My teacher," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. "Miss Winsley, she said I'm just like you, a nobody." It felt like my chest caved in. I blinked. I tried to stay calm. What was happening when she said that? Lena looked at me, eyes wide with hurt. I messed up my lines during the history project. I got nervous and forgot what to say. Everyone was looking at me, and she just shook her head and said it under her breath, but loud enough for people to hear. I sat there in silence for a second, like my brain needed time to catch up to the words. Lena is only 9. She still leaves her stuffed animals lined up on her pillow every morning. She still calls me Mama when she's tired. And this teacher, someone I trusted to protect and encourage her, looked at my daughter at her most vulnerable moment and decided to hurt her even more by going after me. She said, "You're just like your mother, a nobody." My daughter had to stand there in front of her classmates hearing that. I could see how ashamed she felt, as if the insult had some truth to it, as if being like me was something to be embarrassed about. I held her. I told her that what her teacher said was wrong and cruel and that being like me wasn't a flaw. It was something to be proud of. But I could feel it. Deep down, she had already started to believe the lie. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't even pick up the phone. I waited until she fell asleep in my arms. Then I got to work. I'm not the kind of person who makes scenes or raises my voice, but I don't let people hurt my daughter. I don't let people define her worth, or mine, with a careless sentence. The next morning, I walked into that school. I asked to speak with the principal, and Ms. Winsley was there too. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I stayed quiet while they gave their rehearsed explanations and polite little smiles. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. "This is from my lawyer. Page 3 is the recording. Page 5 is your termination." Their faces changed instantly, and in that moment, I realized something. I might be invisible to them. I might be just a name on a contact form, or the woman who shows up at parent night with no husband at her side. But to my daughter, I am not a nobody. I'm the reason she sleeps peacefully at night. I'm the one she looks for first when she's scared. And I'm the woman who will burn the whole system down if it ever makes her feel small again. You don't call me a nobody. Not in front of my daughter. Not ever. My name is Amira Callan. I'm 34 years old, and for the past 7 years, it's just been me and my daughter, Lena. We live in a small 2-bedroom apartment in Portland. It's not fancy, but it's full of love. There's a worn-out couch we refuse to replace, covered in mismatched pillows Lena picked out herself. Our fridge is covered in hand-drawn notes and spelling tests, and the grocery list we always forget to update. Her room is a museum of crayon art and construction paper stars. Mine is quiet, mostly books and the smell of peppermint tea. I work from home as a legal researcher for a nonprofit. It doesn't pay much, but it gives me the one thing I've always fought hardest to have: time with my daughter. After my divorce, I promised myself I wouldn't let her grow up feeling like an afterthought. Her dad, Jace, moved to Seattle a year after we split. He calls on holidays and sometimes remembers birthdays. I've never said anything bad about him in front of her, but she's smart. She notices when someone disappears. Lena is the light of my life. She's 9 years old, funny, sharp, endlessly curious. She can't stand injustice. She gets that from me. She loves reading, especially stories with brave girls who stand up for themselves. When she was 5, she told me she wanted to be both a veterinarian and a poet, and I told her she could be both, and 100 other things too. She goes to Willard Elementary, a public school about 15 minutes from where we live. It's the kind of place where some teachers genuinely care, and others are just waiting out their time. I always hoped Lena would land in the right hands. She was excited for this year's Living History event. Each student was supposed to pick a historical figure and give a short presentation to the class. Lena chose Maya Angelou. We spent 2 weekends working on her costume. She wore a simple black dress and glasses and carried a notebook with quotes she had memorized. She practiced her lines every night before bed. I may be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. She repeated that one the most. She said it made her feel strong. The morning of the event, she was bouncing around the kitchen, too nervous to eat her cereal. I helped her pin her hair up and reminded her to speak slowly, make eye contact, and breathe. Right before she left, she looked at me and said, "Do you think Maya Angelou would have liked me?" I knelt down, fixed the collar of her dress, and said, "She would have seen herself in you." Lena beamed. She hugged me tight, then ran down the stairs with her backpack swinging behind her. I watched from the window until she turned the corner. The house was quiet after that. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and tried to focus on a contract analysis I was behind on. But I kept glancing at the clock. I imagined her standing in front of the class, nervously gripping her notes, remembering every line she had practiced. Around 3 o'clock, I was wrapping up a call when I heard the front door open with a crash. I turned and saw her, standing in the doorway, eyes red, lips trembling. She didn't say a word. She dropped her backpack, walked straight to her room, and slammed the door. I froze. That wasn't like her. She's emotional, sure, but she always talks to me. Always. I walked to her room, knocked gently, and opened the door. She was curled up on her bed, shoulders shaking, muffled sobs escaping from under her pillow. That's where the story truly begins. Not with what I did next, but with how I held her, how I listened, how I asked, again and again, what had happened until she finally told me. It was her teacher, Miss Winsley. She said those words to my daughter, in front of her peers. Words meant to cut, to humiliate, to silence. In that moment, something shifted in me. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew this. I would not let that moment define Lena, and I would not let that woman walk away from it unchanged. This wasn't just about a teacher's cruel comment. It was about what it means when adults forget the power they have over a child's spirit. It was about what happens when someone tries to write your worth in someone else's voice, and I wasn't going to let that stand. After Lena told me what happened, I sat next to her in stunned silence. I kept my arm around her as she spoke, gently pulling the story out piece by piece. She told me about the classroom, how excited she had been at first, how nervous she felt standing in front of everyone. She had rehearsed her lines so many times she could recite them backward, but when it was finally her turn, something inside her froze. Her throat tightened and her mind blanked. She tried to push through it. She looked at her teacher for reassurance. Instead, she saw the expression that would haunt her later that night, disappointment laced with disgust. According to Lena, Ms. Winsley sighed, shook her head, and said, clear enough for others to hear, "You're just like your mother, a nobody." The word nobody settled in my chest like a stone. It wasn't just the insult. It was who she said it to and how. My daughter had been humiliated while standing alone in front of her peers, and not by another student, by the adult in the room, the one who was supposed to encourage her, support her, protect her. I asked Lena what happened next. She said a few kids snickered. One girl tried to mouth, "Are you okay?" But she didn't respond. She finished her lines in a shaky voice, sat down, and stayed quiet for the rest of the day. She didn't tell anyone. She was embarrassed. That hurt the most, that a 9-year-old would carry that kind of shame, not even knowing what to do with it, just assuming that maybe the teacher was right. Maybe she was like her mother. Maybe that was a bad thing. I tucked her into bed early that night. I let her sleep in my room, something she hadn't done in over a year. She clutched her stuffed turtle and asked if she had messed everything up. I told her the truth. She had done nothing wrong, and the only one who should feel ashamed was her teacher. After she fell asleep, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. I wanted to scream. I wanted to storm into the school and demand answers. But I knew that anger wouldn't fix this. Rage wouldn't protect her. I needed to do this the right way, the lasting way. So I got up, grabbed my laptop, and started working. I pulled up Willard Elementary's website. I found their code of conduct, their staff directory, their teacher evaluation forms. I took notes. I looked up the Oregon State Education Board's policy on teacher misconduct and verbal abuse. I reviewed recent cases and complaints in public school systems. I knew how to do this. I had worked in legal research for nearly a decade. If anyone could build a case, it was me. But I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability. The more I read, the more disgusted I felt. I found that Ms. Winsley had been teaching for over 15 years, had glowing performance reviews, and was often praised for her discipline and structure. But none of those reviews came from parents. None were based on how she treated children who struggled or froze or didn't fit the mold. I decided to reach out to another parent, Rosa Mercado. Her son, Julian, was in Lena's class. I asked her if he had said anything about the event. She hesitated, then admitted Julian had mentioned something weird about what the teacher said to Lena. Rosa let me talk to Julian on speakerphone. He repeated it nearly word for word. "You're just like your mother, a nobody." My hands were shaking by the time I hung up. This wasn't just my daughter's story anymore. There was a witness, an actual account. I asked Rosa for permission to document the conversation and told her exactly what I planned to do. She agreed. She told me her son had felt uncomfortable around that teacher for a while. I opened a folder on my desktop titled Lena School Matter. I saved everything: screenshots, statements, district policy documents. I contacted a friend of mine, Tara, who worked at a small legal firm downtown. She offered to help me draft a formal complaint and include a legal letter to the school. That night, I printed it all. I read every line twice. I kept thinking about how Lena's eyes looked when she said those words, how her voice cracked. I wasn't going to let that be her first real memory of standing up in front of people. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I laid out my clothes, brushed Lena's hair, and kissed her forehead. I told her I loved her and that I believed in her more than anything in the world. Then I packed my bag with one simple folder and walked out the door. The school building looked ordinary that morning. Children filed in with oversized backpacks and sleepy faces. Parents chatted in clusters by the entrance, and staff members greeted each other like it was just another Tuesday. But for me, that walk through the front doors was deliberate. Every step I took was controlled, every breath steady. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to break down. I had something better than outrage. I had evidence, truth, and my daughter's dignity to protect. When I walked Lena to her classroom, I knelt beside her and smoothed out the wrinkle in her sleeve. She didn't smile like she usually did. Her eyes still held that weight from the day before. I kissed the top of her head and whispered, "Today's going to be a good day, I promise." She nodded slowly and walked into the room without a word. I turned and headed straight to the office. The secretary, a woman named June, who had always been polite in a distant kind of way, looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" "I'd like to speak with Principal Edmonds. I have something that needs to be addressed immediately." She blinked, then nodded and picked up the phone. Within minutes, I was sitting in the small conference room just off the main hallway. The walls were lined with student art projects and photos of past field days. It felt like any other schoolroom, but the folder in my hands gave the space a new weight. Principal Edmonds walked in first. He was in his early 50s, a calm-faced man who always spoke like he was trying not to scare anyone. I stood and shook his hand. "Ms. Callan," he said, "what's this about?" Before I could respond, Ms. Winsley entered the room. She seemed completely unbothered. She gave me a tight smile like we were about to discuss a minor scheduling issue. I sat down without greeting her. The principal cleared his throat. "So you mentioned this was urgent. What's going on?" I took a breath, opened my bag, and pulled out the manila folder. I placed it on the table in front of them and slid it across the polished surface toward Principal Edmonds. "This is from my attorney," I said calmly. Page 3 is a transcript of a recording from a conversation between two students. One of them is my daughter. The other is a classmate who confirms that during yesterday's event, Ms. Winsley made a personal insult about me to my child in front of her peers. Neither of them moved. Page 4 is a copy of your own district's Code of Conduct. Section 2, Article 7, outlines professional behavior and emotional safety. The behavior in question violates 3 separate clauses. Still nothing. Page 5 is a formal draft of a termination request. It includes the evidence, a summary of witness statements, and the names of those who are willing to confirm what was said. We will be forwarding it to the district office if I don't receive an immediate and appropriate response. The silence was complete. The principal finally reached for the folder, opened it, and began reading. Ms. Winsley laughed once under her breath. Was this really necessary? It was a slip. I was trying to redirect her attention, and I looked at her directly. You humiliated my daughter in front of her classmates. You called her a nobody by calling me one. She didn't need redirecting. She needed support. I didn't say it like that. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lean forward. I just kept my gaze steady. You said it, and a child heard it clearly enough to repeat it word for word. You don't get to minimize it now. Principal Edmonds looked visibly shaken. His hands were folded over the folder, his lips pressed together. He finally said, "Thank you, Ms. Callan. We'll be reviewing this immediately and contacting the district's legal team. I want you to know we take these kinds of matters seriously." I nodded once and stood. As I gathered my things, I looked at Ms. Winsley one last time. You told my daughter I was a nobody. You tried to use your authority to shame her. That may have worked on other kids, but not mine. You picked the wrong child. You picked the wrong mother. Then I left. As I walked through the halls, students were laughing, lockers were slamming shut, and teachers stood outside their doors chatting. It looked like any other school day. But for me, everything had changed, because I had stopped waiting for the world to do the right thing. I had done it myself. I didn't say a word when I left the conference room. I didn't need to. The truth was now sitting in black and white on the table in front of them. Let them read it. Let them sit with it. Let them realize what it meant when a mother stops asking for justice and starts demanding it. That evening, I got a call from the assistant superintendent's office. They had received my documentation and would be conducting an immediate internal review. I knew what that meant. It meant I had their attention. It meant they couldn't bury this. The next morning, Lena woke up more cheerful than I expected. She asked if she could take her art supplies to school so she could work on a poster during recess. I said yes. I watched her pack her markers into her pencil pouch and adjust the straps on her backpack. There was a quiet strength in her again. It wasn't completely restored, but it was returning. Later that day, I got another call, this time from Principal Edmonds. His voice was less polished than usual. There was hesitation in every word. "Ms. Callan," he said, "I wanted to inform you that Ms. Winsley has been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. She will not return to the classroom during this process." I let the silence hang for a moment before I answered, "Thank you for letting me know." He began to offer an explanation, but I stopped him. "Mr. Edmonds, I'm not interested in excuses. I'm interested in outcomes. If you want to rebuild trust with families, you can start by holding people accountable." He paused, then simply said, "Understood." By the end of the week, a substitute teacher had taken over Lena's class, a kind man named Mr. Drew. He introduced himself to the students with a warm smile and a promise that everyone would get a fresh start. When Lena came home that Friday, she told me Mr. Drew had asked each student what they loved to do outside of school. Lena told him she liked to draw. He asked if she would be willing to help decorate the classroom bulletin board. That night, she came home beaming. She showed me the sketches she had made. There were stars, animals, and a quote from Maya Angelou that she wrote in big purple letters. "Still, like dust, I'll rise." My chest tightened as I read it. She hadn't given up on her project. She hadn't given up on herself. A week later, I received a final letter from the school district. They had completed their review. The audio and transcript, along with corroborating witness statements, were enough to support disciplinary action. Ms. Winsley's contract would not be renewed. Her employment was officially terminated. The letter was written in legal language, but I knew what it meant. It meant they had no room to defend her. It meant the truth had weight. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post about it online or tell other parents in the pickup line. This wasn't about revenge or winning. It was about showing my daughter what it looks like to stand up without shouting, to fight without violence, to carry yourself with dignity even when others try to strip it from you. Later that month, we were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner. Lena was coloring, her tongue poking out slightly as she focused on staying inside the lines. Out of nowhere, she said, "Mom, I think she was wrong." "About what?" I asked. "About you being a nobody. I think you're the biggest somebody I've ever known." I couldn't respond right away. I just reached across the table and took her hand. That moment didn't undo what had happened, but it gave it meaning. It reminded me why I did what I did. Not for the adults in that school, not for the administration or the policies. I did it for the little girl in the black dress with the Maya Angelou quote in her hands, standing nervously in front of a room full of people, hoping someone would see her. And I did it because someone tried to make her feel small, but she isn't small, and neither am I. Life settled back into its rhythms, but something inside me had shifted. The school year continued, routines resumed, and the incident slowly faded from the headlines of conversation. But for me and Lena, things didn't return to the way they were. They became something better. Lena's confidence began to rebuild piece by piece. Her new teacher, Mr. Drew, was patient and thoughtful. He encouraged creativity, asked for student input, and made sure everyone in the room felt heard. It was a stark contrast from what she had known before. He never once brought up the incident. He didn't need to. He simply showed her what safe felt like. One afternoon, Lena brought home a flyer from school. It was for a storytelling night. Parents and students could take turns reading aloud, sharing something personal or meaningful. When she handed it to me, I expected her to ask if I would go. Instead, she asked if we could read something together. I was stunned. "You want us both to read?" I asked. She nodded. "Can we read Maya Angelou?" So we did. The following Thursday evening, I stood beside my daughter in front of a small crowd of folding chairs and supportive parents. We took turns reading stanzas from Still I Rise. Her voice was steady. She looked up from the paper often, scanning the room like she wasn't afraid anymore. And when we finished, the applause felt real. Not loud or forced, but meaningful. A few people even stood. Afterward, one of her classmates came over and said, "That was so cool." Lena smiled without hesitation. She didn't look for my approval. She already had it in herself. That moment felt like closure, not because it erased what happened, but because it showed how far she had come, how far we had come. I thought a lot about what Ms. Winsley had said, about the word she used so casually, nobody, a word meant to belittle, to reduce, to make invisible. I used to think being quiet or modest made it easy for people to underestimate you, but now I know the truth. Strength isn't about being loud. It's about being grounded. It's about knowing who you are even when others try to redefine you. I also realized that Lena wasn't just learning how to be brave. She was learning how to be watchful. She had seen how I handled the situation, and she paid attention, not to the documents or the legal steps, but to the posture I kept, to the way I refused to meet cruelty with cruelty. I taught her that standing up for yourself doesn't require rage, just resolve. One night, as we were getting ready for bed, Lena asked, "Do you think she knew she was hurting me?" I paused. "I don't know what she was thinking, but I know she didn't expect you to stand back up." She was quiet for a moment. "You helped me do that." I smiled. "That's my job." A few weeks later, the school invited me to speak at a parent roundtable about communication and teacher-parent relationships. I almost said no. I wasn't interested in being a token example or a cautionary tale, but Lena encouraged me. "You're good at saying the truth without being mean," she said. "Maybe someone else needs to hear that." So I went. I told our story. I spoke about the power teachers have with their words. I reminded them that a child's self-worth can be shaken by a single sentence. And I said what needed to be said, that protecting students means protecting their dignity. When I left the room, a few parents stopped me to say thank you. One of them, a father with 2 kids in the district, said, "I felt that helplessness before. You made me feel less alone." That stuck with me, because in the end, that's what this was really about. Not just defending my daughter, but refusing to let any child feel unseen, refusing to let any parent feel like they don't matter, refusing to let people in power speak without consequence. My daughter is not a nobody, and neither am I. We are people who rise, and we always will. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the words we use and the impact they leave behind, then share it. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth. Share it with someone raising a child on their own. Share it with a teacher, a parent, a friend, because standing up doesn't always look like a fight. Sometimes it looks like a folder on a table and a child finding her voice again. If you believe in stories that make people feel seen, give this video a like. Leave a comment. I read every single one. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next one. This isn't just a channel, it's a space for real people, real voices, and the quiet strength we carry with us every day. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.